"You're not mad, are you? Your fiancé and I just fell in love," chirped my best friend at the wedding she had deliberately organized at the restaurant where I worked as a waitress. But I simply walked up to the microphone and played one audio recording. What the guests heard made the bride and groom run out of the hall. The first thing you learn in New York is to never believe in free cheese. The second is that life is like a studio recording. No matter how many takes you do, the final mix always sounds different than you expected. When Jessica and I pulled our suitcases off the bus at Port Authority, the sky was blanketed by low clouds the color of wet asphalt. We stood there clutching the straps of our backpacks, trying to make sense of the chaos at the New York terminal. "You look like you're about to cry or run back home," Jessica laughed, adjusting her perfectly styled blonde hair. She always managed to look composed, even after an 8-hour bus ride. I, on the other hand, looked more like a ruffled sparrow. "I'm just trying to wrap my head around the fact that we actually did this," I said, staring at the endless stream of people around us. "We left Toledo." Jessica rolled her eyes. "Oh God, Samantha, you always make everything into a big moment. Let's just find a cab and get to our apartment. I'm starving." Calling our first New York place an apartment was generous. It was a room with a ceiling that felt like it was pressing down on your head, a shared bathroom in the hallway, and a kitchen the size of a postage stamp. But it was ours. Well, ours for the next 3 months, while we searched for permanent housing and work. "Isn't it perfect?" Jessica spun in the middle of the room, nearly knocking over the only lamp. "The musical Olympus awaits us, Sam." I smiled. We were complete opposites. I was the introverted songwriter, always clutching a notebook, and she was the radiant performer with a voice that could make stone cry. But we shared one dream: music. I remember the night I first met Jessica. I was 15, performing an acoustic Fleetwood Mac cover at our high school talent show in Toledo. My hands shook so much that the guitar strings buzzed even when I wasn't touching them. When I finished, the applause was polite, but lukewarm. Then she walked onto the stage, the new girl from the other class. Jessica sang Etta James's "At Last," and the crowd erupted. After the show, she came up to me backstage. "Hey, you're the girl with the guitar?" she asked, reaching out her hand. "I'm Jessica. You play great." "Thanks," I mumbled, surprised the star of the night was even talking to me. You have an amazing voice." "I know," she laughed, not arrogantly, just like she was stating a fact, like the color of her hair. "And you write cool songs. I heard you playing something original during rehearsal. We should jam sometime." That's how our friendship began. I wrote the songs, she sang them. I was the brains, she was the face. And it worked. For 6 years, we planned to move to New York after graduation, become a musical duo, and take the world by storm. For 6 years, I believed our differences made us stronger. The first 6 months in New York were like a marathon with no finish line. By day, I worked at a coffee shop in the West Village. By night, I was at Blackbird Bar, where they let beginners perform once in a while. Jessica got a job as a hostess at a trendy restaurant in Chelsea. We saved money on everything except recording demos. "You've got something others don't," Nate Ellison told me after my 3rd performance at Blackbird. "You write songs that make people remember things they've never actually lived through." He was a skinny guy with a mop of messy dark hair and piercing brown eyes. He wore a worn leather jacket and a t-shirt from some band I'd never heard of. A sound producer who worked with several indie labels. "Is that a compliment or a diagnosis?" I asked, putting my guitar back into its case. "Definitely a compliment," he smiled. "Listen, I work with Quantum Records. I've got a small home studio. If you want to record something better than what you're doing now, first session's on the house." I remember telling Jessica about it that same evening. "Quantum Records?" Her eyes widened. "Sam, they're the ones who released Last Echo and the Rosemary Effect. This is an amazing opportunity." "Yeah, but I'm not sure he's actually interested in my music," I said, hugging my knees on our battered couch. "Maybe he's just, you know." Jessica gave me a strange look. a mix of impatience and something else I couldn't quite read. "You always do this, Sam. Someone shows interest in your music, and you think he's trying to get into your pants." She shook her head. "If you don't want to go alone, I can come with you. Safer together, right?" And that's how Nate came into my life. 2 months later, we were dating. 4 months in, I'd moved in with him. 6 months later, there was a simple silver ring on my finger and a contract in our mailbox from Quantum Records to record a 6-track EP with an option for a full-length album. Jessica was the first person I called with the news of my engagement. She squealed so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "I always knew you'd be the first to make it," she blurted out. And there was a strange note in her voice I couldn't quite decipher at the time. "I need to toast my talented friend. I'll be at Nate's in an hour." She arrived with a bottle of champagne and an idea. "Sam, I have to help you with backing vocals on the recording. We always dreamed of performing together, remember?" Nate, sitting next to me on the cracked leather sofa, placed his hand on my shoulder. "That's a great idea. Your voices go really well together." And so, our little dream team was formed. I wrote the songs, Nate produced, Jessica sang backing vocals and helped with arrangements. When I had to work extra shifts at the Midnight Key, a new jazz bar where I got a waitress job to save money for album promotion, they stayed at the studio together, fine-tuning the details. Now I know I should have seen the signs. The way Nate looked at Jessica when he thought I wasn't watching, how she started dressing more deliberately whenever we went to the studio. Those nights when I came home from work and found them mid-conversation, one that ended abruptly the moment I walked in. But love makes you blind. It's not just a cliche. It really does distort your reality, makes you see only what you want to see, and ignore the obvious. That night, I had my first nightmare. I was on stage at Blackbird, but when I started singing, no sound came out. I opened and closed my mouth like a fish out of water. The audience was laughing. In the front row, Nate and Jessica sat holding hands, pity written all over their faces. "Don't worry," Jessica said, but her lips didn't move, and her voice sounded exactly like mine. "I'll lend you my voice." She opened her mouth, and a silver orb of light floated out, drifting slowly toward me. I woke up in a cold sweat. "What's wrong?" Nate mumbled, eyes still closed. "Just a nightmare," I said, but a strange feeling of dread settled in my chest and didn't leave all day. The universe loves irony. The day I found out I'd been betrayed by the two people closest to me was supposed to be one of the happiest of my life. That morning, I received an email from Quantum Records confirming the release date of my EP. I bought a bottle of expensive Syrah, Nate's favorite wine, and came home early to set up a surprise. Turns out the surprise was for me. I still remember every detail of that moment: the creak of the floorboard near the bedroom door, a slight pause, then the rustling of sheets. Sounds. It's always the sounds first. Then the image. They didn't even hear me come in. The bottle slipped from my hands and landed with a soft thud on the carpet. It didn't shatter. The final irony of the day. Jessica saw me first. Her face shifted from sultry to horrified in less than a second. Nate turned sharply. "Sam, this isn't what it looks like," he started, pulling on his jeans. The phrase was so cliched that in another situation I might have laughed. "We wanted to tell you, we were just waiting for the right moment," Jessica added, clutching the blanket. "It just happened. Sometimes things happen." I didn't make a scene. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A strange numbness washed over me, like I was watching it all from the outside. I quietly gathered a few things, slipped the ring off my finger, placed it on the dresser, and left. Only in a small hotel in Brooklyn after taking a cab did it finally hit me. I sobbed the entire night, sitting on the bathroom floor. Let the shower wash away my tears, then sobbed again. The next morning, I got a message from Nate. "I re-recorded your tracks with Jess on lead vocals. The label thinks she's a better fit for the material. Your songs still get a chance, just with her voice. Hope you understand." I began to understand when I met Jeremy Fox. a music attorney recommended by a bartender at Blackbird. His office smelled like old books and coffee, with gold and platinum records on the walls from artists he'd represented. "Let me see your contract," he said, putting on tortoiseshell glasses. I handed him the slightly crumpled folder. "Oh." He winced around page 3. "What? You should have shown this to a lawyer before signing, Miss Carter." Jeremy pointed to Clause 17.4, written in fine print, buried among pages of legal jargon. The label reserves the right to replace the performer of the works at its discretion if deemed necessary for the commercial success of the release. Authorship may be reassigned or shared at the discretion of the project producer. "They can take my songs?" My voice was barely a whisper. "I'm afraid, under this contract, yes. They can use your material with another vocalist and even credit that vocalist as a co-writer. Without proof of your sole original authorship, it'll be very hard to contest." My life had collapsed into dust, twice, in less than 48 hours. "Why would they do this?" I asked, grasping for logic. "Nate told me my songs were special. Why replace me with Jessica?" Jeremy sighed. "The music business is ruthless, Ms. Carter. Talent is just one part of success." He paused. "Have you ever heard of Frank Farian?" I shook my head. He created Milli Vanilli, two attractive guys on stage lip-syncing to someone else's voice. The real vocalist wasn't considered marketable enough. This industry is full of stories like that. Your Nate just decided Jessica was a better front. Maybe it's her looks, her stage presence, her connections, or maybe it's just easier for him now that they're together. That night, I had another nightmare. I was back in the restaurant where I used to work, but now it was the size of a stadium. At one of the tables sat Jessica, wearing my clothes, with my hair, my face. Nate walked up and said, "There you are, Samantha. I've been looking everywhere for you." Then he turned to me, the real me, standing there holding a tray, and asked, "Who are you?" I woke up with my heart pounding. The motel room was stifling. I turned on the air conditioner, but it just sputtered and wheezed out warm air. I sat on the bed, hugging my knees, and realized my deepest fear wasn't that they'd stolen my songs. It was that they'd stolen my identity. I don't remember how I made it through the next week. The sharp pain turned into a dull numbness. I stopped crying. There were no tears left. I found the cheapest room I could in an apartment with 3 roommates in Bushwick. Sold my main acoustic guitar to make the first rent payment. Took on 3 jobs: barista by day, waitress at the Crimson by night, and weekend receptionist at a small hotel. A week later, I went back to Nate's place to pick up the rest of my things, choosing a day I knew he'd be at the studio. It's a strange feeling, walking into an apartment that was once your home, now with the sense that you're trespassing. In Nate's home studio, a small room off the living room, creative chaos reigned. I was looking for my songwriting journal, the only real proof of authorship I had left behind in the rush. Clothes can be replaced, but those pages were priceless. I found the journal under a stack of sheet music. As I was putting the papers back, I noticed a chart on Nate's desk, a schedule titled Sam Jess Project Timeline. It outlined a detailed plan for the past 3 months with bullet points like re-record Sam's vocals and adjust Jess's image to match target audience. This wasn't a spontaneous betrayal, it was a calculated business strategy. Beside it was an external hard drive labeled Backups. I plugged it into the computer to confirm what I was already beginning to suspect. In one of the folders, I found a directory called Sam to Jess Transition. I clicked on one of the audio files. Nate's voice came through the speakers. "All right, Jess, one more time. Look, Sam hits this note with a breathy tone. Right here, hear that? Try to copy it. No, raspier. Yes, just like that. Once we're done with all the takes, I'll add effects. Nobody will know the difference. The label's going to love it." My fingers clenched into fists so tight, my nails dug into my palms. The folder had about 20 such files. Entire sessions where Nate coached Jessica to mimic my singing style, my vocal techniques, even the way I breathed between phrases. A systematic plan for replacement, and judging by the file dates, it had started 2 months before I caught them together. My happy engagement had been part of their strategy to keep me close while they stole my voice. With shaking hands, I copied the entire folder onto my flash drive. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it, but something in me screamed that it mattered. That's when I heard the sound of a key in the front door lock. Panic surged through me. Nate was home early. I yanked out the flash drive, closed the folder, grabbed the journal. In my rush and panic, I completely forgot my electric guitar, which was still on its stand in the corner of the studio. My only thought was to get out before I was seen. I slipped out the back door just as I heard Nate's voice in the hallway. The next 6 months, I lived on autopilot. I quit music. I couldn't even listen to the radio. I worked, ate, slept, worked again. My roommates barely saw me. I came home after they were asleep and left before they woke up. Jessica showed up in my dreams every night. Sometimes she was me. Sometimes my voice came out of her mouth, like a separate being. Sometimes I tried to scream, but the sound got caught in my throat, turning into a silent wail. I woke up drenched in sweat, feeling like I was losing not just my songs, but myself. One day, one of my roommates left a free copy of The Village Voice on the kitchen table. On the cover was a photo of Jessica holding a guitar, my former electric guitar, the vintage Fender Stratocaster I'd forgotten at Nate's place. I had already sold my acoustic guitar to cover rent, but that Strat, a gift from my uncle, I never managed to grab the day I left. The headline read, "Jessica Blair, a bright new voice on the indie scene." I crumpled the newspaper and threw it out without reading the article. At the Crimson, a dark, elegant bar in the Lower East Side, industry people often came in. I learned to tune out their conversations, mentally switching off whenever they discussed new releases or up-and-coming artists. But there was one regular I couldn't ignore. Alex Klein, tall, with perpetual stubble and messy sandy hair, came in every Thursday. He always ordered the same thing, rare steak and bourbon on the rocks, always sat in the corner booth, always tipped well. I noticed the way he watched me, not with the kind of look I was used to from male patrons. In his eyes there was curiosity and something else I couldn't place. "You always hum while polishing glasses," he said one day as I brought him another bourbon. "Today it was Charles Mingus, right?" I looked at him in surprise. "You know jazz?" "I photograph jazz musicians for Downbeat and a couple of other mags," he said, handing me a business card. "Alex Klein, photographer and occasional documentarian." I took the card mostly out of politeness. "Samantha, just a waitress." "Something tells me 'just' isn't the right word to describe you, Samantha." The next week, he came in with an envelope. "Ticket to Avishai Cohen Quartet at the Village Vanguard next Friday," he said. "I noticed you hum his tunes a lot." "And why do you think I'd accept it?" I asked, eyeing the envelope warily. "Because good music heals, and you look like someone who needs healing." I nearly turned him down, but something in his direct, open gaze made me take the ticket. "Just don't take it as a date," I warned. "Of course not. I'll be shooting the concert for a magazine. Just thought you might enjoy the music." It was the first evening in a long time that I felt something other than emptiness. Avishai's music wrapped around me, making me forget everything. At some point, I closed my eyes and let myself float on the waves of sound. After the concert, Alex and I had coffee at a small cafe across the street. I hadn't planned on opening up to him, but the words poured out on their own, about music, dreams, betrayal, about the songs that had been stolen from me, about the recordings I'd found. "That's a textbook case of plagiarism and unlawful appropriation of intellectual property," he said, tapping his fingers on the table. "My sister's an intellectual property lawyer. I think you should talk to her." "What for?" I gave a bitter smile. "What can I do against a label? I don't have the money for a legal battle." "But you have evidence, and your voice, and maybe a new path in the industry." That night, standing in front of the mirror brushing my teeth, I froze for a moment, staring at my reflection. Toothpaste was dripping down my chin, but I didn't seem to notice. It wasn't my tiny bathroom with peeling paint I saw in the mirror. It was a stage. My imagination took over completely. I was under the spotlight, but instead of the usual nightmare with a missing voice, I was singing. Loudly, clearly, freely. There were no Nates or Jessicas in the imagined audience, only people who were really listening. To me, the real me. The sound of dripping water snapped me out of the trance. I had squeezed the toothbrush so hard, toothpaste had splattered into the sink. Michelle Klein, Alex's sister, turned out to be a petite brunette with a piercing gaze and a sharp mind. Her Chelsea office was filled with folders and books on copyright law. "Let's clarify the situation," she said after reviewing my contract and listening to a few recordings. "Legally speaking, the label does have the right to replace the performer. But when it comes to authorship, it's more complicated. The contract is deliberately vague. We can try to prove that your authorship was unlawfully claimed." "How?" "We'll need witnesses who can confirm you were performing those songs long before the contract was signed, dated drafts, and of course, those recordings, where the producer practically admits to the forgery." The following weeks turned into a hunt for evidence. I called everyone I had performed with at Blackbird and other bars. I searched for old recordings on my phone. My songwriting journal became a key piece of evidence, with dates, scratched out lines, rhyming options, all of it showing the song creation process. "What does your former friend Jessica look like?" Michelle asked during one of our meetings. "Tall, slim, long blonde hair." I began listing. "No, I mean, does she look like a model? Like a typical pop star?" I thought for a moment. "Yes, I guess. She always knew how to present herself." Michelle nodded. "That's what I figured. It explains Nate's motivation." "What do you mean?" "Look at it from a business angle. Your songs are talented, no doubt, but the music industry markets around image. A producer might feel the material is easier to sell to an audience with a certain kind of look." She paused. "It's cynical, but it's the industry's reality. A classic case where the person writing the songs doesn't match the marketable image of the performer." Her words stung, but deep down, I knew they were true. Jessica had always been the face of our duo back in Toledo. I was the one who stayed in the shadows. In the meantime, Alex suggested I try something new. Underground Sound is looking for an editorial assistant. You know more about music than half their staff. I showed David that concert review you wrote about Avishai. "I only wrote that to thank you for the ticket. And it's damn good. David wants to meet you on Thursday." That's how I returned to the music industry, but from a different side. The internship at Underground Sound was unpaid, so I kept all my other jobs, but it gave me access to the world of music. I started with basic tasks: transcribing interviews, fact-checking other journalists' drafts, compiling playlists. 3 months in, I was trusted with my first solo album review for a debut folk band. 2 months later, I was interviewing artists at small festivals. Sometimes it still hurt, listening to other people's music while mine remained imprisoned, but little by little, I began to feel like I was healing. That spring, Edith Romero returned too, a legend of the 90s indie scene who had left the industry after a scandal with her label 20 years ago. She released an album independently, without support from major companies. Underground Sound sent me to interview her. We met in a small Brooklyn cafe. Edith, a woman in her early 50s, had that special kind of magnetism that appears when someone has finally stopped playing the roles others forced on them. "Your editor said you'd understand my story better than anyone," she began, stirring her tea. Something about personal experience standing up to the corporate machine. I didn't know what David had told her about me, but I decided to be honest. "Probably true. My former best friend and ex-fiancé stole my songs," I said with a wry smile. "A classic failure story in the big city." "Ah, one of those situations where the talented one writes and the pretty face performs." Edith nodded. "Happened to me too, back in the 90s, except it was my manager and the band's guitarist." "How did you deal with it?" "Honestly, I couldn't even look at a guitar for 10 years. Only sang in the shower." She paused. Then I realized I was letting them steal not just my songs, but my life. Every day I didn't sing, didn't write, didn't express myself was another day they'd taken from me. After the interview, Edith scribbled a name and address on a napkin. "Come to this studio next Wednesday. I'm recording new material. I need backing vocals on a couple of tracks." I shook my head. "I don't sing anymore." "Then come to listen, or just to watch an old witch at work," she smiled. "Sometimes you need to see that others have been through hell and survived to believe that you can too." I came, and that day, for the first time in a year, I opened my mouth to sing, softly, almost a whisper, joining a harmony during rehearsal. Edith pretended not to notice, but the following week she invited me again, and then again, and again. Then an email arrived in my work inbox from Quantum Records' PR agency. "You are invited to the debut album launch of rising star Jessica Blair, Threads of Light, on March 15th at the Gramercy Theater. A private after-party will follow at the Crimson Restaurant. RSVP by March 10th. I stared at the monitor, unable to believe the irony. They were hosting the after-party at the restaurant where I worked. The headline of the press release read, "Jessica Blair and Nate Ellison announce engagement on the day of album release." "I'm not going," I told David, our editor. "You are," he replied, adjusting his glasses. "This is your chance to cover a major release. Just be professional, Sam." That evening, I told Alex about the awful coincidence. "Invite me as your photographer," he offered after a pause. "Why?" "It's a chance to document their infringement. I'll be the official event photographer, approved by the publication. Everything they say about your songs will be on record, witnessed." Michelle, who was present during the conversation, perked up. A public admission of plagiarism, captured on video, is powerful evidence, and if it happens in front of industry professionals, the label is more likely to settle out of court than risk their reputation. The plan was insane. I had doubts until the very last day. But something inside me, dormant for so long, was waking up. The desire to fight, the need to reclaim justice. The night before the launch, I had an unexpectedly peaceful dream. I stood at the ocean's edge. Waves rolled rhythmically onto the sand, washing away my footprints with each tide. But I wasn't afraid of disappearing. I knew I'd leave new prints behind. When I woke, I felt calm, almost confident. On the day of the event, I sat in the back row of the Gramercy Theater, hidden under a hoodie. Alex circled the venue, taking photos of the crowd and the stage. Jessica glowed in a shimmering silver dress. She performed my songs about my life, my emotions, my wounds. Between tracks, she told stories, my stories, passing them off as her own. "Broken glass," I wrote after a particularly painful breakup in college, she said into the mic. "A lie. I wrote it after my grandmother's death. The glass shards were a metaphor for a shattered family. Midnight shores came to me during a moonlit walk on the beach in Montauk." Another lie. I've never been to Montauk. I wrote it while sitting on a Brooklyn pier after my first night in New York. Hearing her not only steal the music, but also my most personal experiences, was physically painful. But I held on. Alex recorded every word, every gesture. After the performance, Nate walked onto the stage, got down on one knee, and proposed to Jessica, with a speech about how they'd created the album together, how their creative and personal connection had turned into something greater. The crowd erupted in applause. I sat gripping the armrests so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then the action shifted to the crimson. I had quietly left the theater early to change into my work uniform. Carol, the manager, raised an eyebrow when I asked to be scheduled for the evening shift. "No one told you?" "We're closed for a private event tonight." "That's why I'm asking. I need the cash, and tips are better at private parties." I put on glasses I normally never wore and tied my hair into a tight bun. In that disguise, even people who had seen me perform might not recognize me right away. When the guests arrived, I stayed in the shadows, serving mostly side tables. Alex moved through the room, taking photos for the magazine. Everyone at the door had signed standard consent forms for photo and video recording, a common practice at media events. That gave us the legal right to use the footage. Alex was joined by his colleague Dennis, who assisted with additional shooting. Using professional gear and discreet mics clipped to their lapels, they methodically documented every moment of the evening. At one point, I got close enough to overhear Jessica chatting with her friends about her success. "I always knew those songs needed a real voice. Poor Sam just couldn't handle the material." Alex kept filming, pretending to focus on the room's decor. Later, while serving drinks, I ran into Jessica at the bar. Our eyes met, and her expression shifted instantly. A flicker of surprise, then a forced smile. "Sam, what a surprise! You're working here? How sweet." She turned to the guests nearby. "Everyone, this is Samantha. We used to be roommates." Roommates. As if the years of friendship had evaporated. "Nice to meet you," I replied dryly, doing my best to remain professional. "God, how strange," Jessica went on, swaying slightly with her champagne glass. "You're not still upset, are you? Nate and I just fell in love," she said in a mock whisper, loud enough to be heard. "And your songs finally sound the way they were meant to. You should be grateful they even saw the light of day." I saw Alex discreetly flash me the OK sign. We had enough. The next step was the riskiest. Carol announced that guests could use the microphone for toasts. I volunteered to help with the sound setup. That was part of my duties whenever events were held at the restaurant. Alex slipped me a flash drive as I passed by him with an empty tray. Contrary to what might have seemed like an improvised move, we had carefully prepared everything in advance. The night before, Alex, his colleague Dennis, and I had gathered in his home studio, where we professionally edited the key material, my early demo recordings, clearly dated, and clips from Nate's studio. Alex, with his background in documentary work, insisted that everything be prepped to the highest standard. The flash drive now contained 3 separate video files, not a live edit montage. It was safer that way. I simply had to play the 3 clearly marked pieces of evidence in order. Dennis had managed to add the fresh footage from the party using a laptop in his car in the parking lot. "Good luck," Alex whispered. "We'll be filming." I approached the sound booth and plugged the flash drive into the laptop. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like everyone in the room must hear it. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady when I took the microphone. "I have a special wedding gift for the happy couple." Jessica, standing in the center of attention, turned in surprise, trying to identify who was speaking. Nate froze with a glass in his hand, his face slowly twisting in shock as he finally recognized me. I hit play. First came a recording of me performing Midnight Shores acoustically at Blackbird 1 year earlier, clean, unprocessed sound. The date stamped in the corner of the screen clearly showed it was long before the contract with Quantum was signed. Then, footage from Nate's studio, coaching Jessica to imitate my vocals. "Look," Sam hits that note with a breath. "Try to match it." "No, raspier." "Yes, like that. Now we'll swap her voice for yours, and no one will know the difference." And finally, Jessica's remark from earlier that night. "You should be grateful they even saw the light of day." A heavy silence fell over the room. Jessica turned pale. Nate looked like he'd been punched in the gut. The Quantum Records rep by the bar frantically typed something on his phone. Journalists who had been invited to the party slowly rose from their seats, pulling out their phones. Alex continued filming steadily. "That's a lie," Jessica finally gasped. "She's always been jealous of my talent." "Then why don't we listen to the original session recordings?" I offered, surprised at how calm I sounded. "I have the full takes." Nate grabbed Jessica's hand. "We're leaving." They made a dash for the exit, but journalists alerted by their colleagues inside were already waiting outside. The story exploded across music blogs and social media over the following week. Quantum Records initially released a statement defending Jessica and Nate, but under public pressure and threat of a lawsuit, they changed course. After a thorough internal review, the label is suspending all collaboration with Jessica Blair and Nate Ellison, pending further investigation. The statement read 3 days after the incident. Michelle filed an official copyright infringement claim on my behalf. We didn't ask for huge damages, just acknowledgement of my authorship and the right to perform my own songs. This triggered months of legal battles. Quantum Records hired a whole team of attorneys trying to argue that the contract gave them the right to replace the performer and reassign co-authorship. Our biggest advantage was that the scandal had already gone public, and any court proceedings would only worsen the label's reputation. "They're offering a settlement," Michelle told me 3 months after negotiations began. "They'll acknowledge you as the sole author of all compositions, return the performance rights, and pay compensation for lost profits. Plus, they'll cover our legal fees." "Why did they give in?" I asked, stunned. "Because you did what no one else dared. You accused them of unethical practices in public. No one likes scandal in the age of social media, and you had undeniable proof," Michelle smiled. "Also, the fact that Edith Romero publicly supported you and threatened to tell her own story involving the same label probably helped." While negotiations were ongoing, I continued working at Underground Sound. My articles on the scandal and copyright issues faced by emerging artists caught the attention of larger publications. A year and a half after the incident, I was invited to write a monthly column on musicians' rights for Rolling Stone, and later offered a position as a special correspondent on copyright matters at Billboard. At the same time, I returned to music, first through collaborative sessions with Edith, and then solo. Another label, Echo Collective, known for its fair treatment of songwriters, offered me a contract for my first full-length album. The terms weren't as flashy as Quantum's, but they were far more honest. I retained the rights to all my songs and had a say in all major creative decisions. Alex had been by my side through it all, first as a friend and ally, then as something more. He created a documentary film called Stolen Voices, telling my story and others like it in the music industry. It won an award at an independent film festival. 2 years later, at our wedding in a small Brooklyn loft, I performed a new song about betrayal, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Among the guests were many young musicians for whom our story had become an example of how one can fight for justice without losing oneself. I still see Jessica in music circles from time to time. She's trying to restart her career with new material under a different stage name. Lately, she's been giving voice lessons at a small school in Queens. Nate now works as a sound engineer for corporate events, far removed from the creative side of the industry. Not long ago, Jessica and I came face to face at a festival in Brooklyn. I was there interviewing one of the headliners. She was attending as a guest. A moment of awkward silence passed before she said, "I heard your new album. It's really good." "Thanks," I replied, surprised by the admission. "You probably always hated me," she added, looking somewhere past me. "There was a time when I did," I answered honestly, "but hate is a heavy burden. I didn't plan it," she faltered. "At first, I genuinely just wanted to help. Then Nate said the label didn't believe in your image, said you lacked energy on stage, that the material was too good to risk." I felt the old hurt start to rise, but forced myself to breathe steadily. "And so you decided you deserved my songs more than I did?" "I decided I could bring them to life." She finally looked me in the eyes. "Now I understand how cruel that was." We walked away without saying anything else. I don't know whether it was a real apology or just an attempt to ease her conscience, but it didn't matter. My life no longer revolved around her actions. When we cross paths at industry events now, the atmosphere is always tense, but I no longer feel the burning resentment I once did. "Did you forgive them?" a journalist asked me in an interview recently. "Forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a process," I said. "I don't wish them harm. They're just people who made bad choices. Their real punishment is knowing that success built on lies is never truly solid." My revenge wasn't about destroying them. It was about reclaiming my voice, and not just in music. I no longer have that nightmare where I open my mouth and can't make a sound. Now I dream of the ocean, vast, deep, full of possibilities. Sometimes in those dreams, I sing, and my voice carries out over the water, creating ripples on the surface. In those dreams, I'm not afraid to be heard. In the end, a voice is what defines us, as artists and as people. It's something that can't be stolen unless you allow it. And I will never again let anyone take my voice from me. If you enjoyed the video, please support it with a like and a comment.